Hello everyone, my name is Jackson, and this is a complete guide to Season of Discovery's newest 20-man raid, the Temple of Anh'Qiraj. This guide will cover the entire instance from start to finish, including all trash and bosses on hard mode. So the first pull is going to be an Obsidian Annihilator. They don't hit very hard, but if they reach full mana they will explode, dealing a large amount of AoE damage to the raid. If you come to the raid with mostly Phase 5 Bis and full consumes, you'll notice that all the trash is very undertuned. These guys will fall over very quickly. Just DPS them down, don't bother mana draining. The next pull is a 4-pack of Anubisat Sentinels. Each one will have a random ability which you can reveal by using Detect Magic. They can have Shadow and Frost Reflect, Fire and Arcane Reflect, Mending, which causes them to regain health over time, Mortal Strike, Thorns, Knockback, AoE Shadow Bolt Volley, Mana Burn, or Thunderclap. When you kill one of these, the remaining Sentinels will gain its ability. The only abilities that you really need to look out for are Thunderclap, Shadow Bolt, and Thorns, as killing those first will cause a decent amount of AoE damage to start going out to your raid when the remaining 3 get those abilities. If you get a Shadow Bolt Volley with a Thunderclap in the same pull, just pull the Thunderclap out to the side, kill the rest, and then kill the Thunderclap last. As you can see, these die very quickly in Season of Discovery and are not much of a threat. Honestly, if you have good gear and consumes and world buffs, you can probably just zug these down without much thought to which you're killing first. Here you can see that we accidentally pull the 4-pack with the Annihilator, and it really isn't an issue at all. Just be aware of what their abilities are and kill the ones with big AoE abilities last. If you do pull Annihilators, focus them down ASAP so they don't reach full mana and blow up the raid. I'm using FOJI WEAKAURAS for useful trash and boss alerts. Link to those WEAKAURAS and the necessary add-on to make them work is in the description. Next is the first boss, Prophet Skeram. Before pulling Skeram, make sure to click on this obelisk over to the right to turn on the hard mode mechanic if you intend to take on the hard mode challenge. Do not touch any gongs in the room or for the rest of the raid, as this will turn off any active hard mode mechanics and end your hard mode challenge. Skeram casts arcane explosions that should be kicked to prevent AoE damage. He will also randomly mind control one player at a time, so just be ready to CC that player with Sheep, Stun, or Fear. The most lethal mechanic of this entire fight is just your mind control raiders getting blended by your cleaves. Do not kill your friends. You will want to have one tank assigned to each of the 3 platforms, as he will also randomly teleport to one of the platforms and reset threat. At 75, 50, and 25%, he will teleport to a random platform and summon 2 images of himself on the other 2 locations. These will all need to be picked up and kicked, as they will all cast Arcane Explosion. Focus down the images first, and then drag Skeram back to the middle and resume killing him. The hard mode mechanic is that every 30 seconds while in combat, a spirit image of each player will spawn next to them, and after a few seconds it will do a small arcane explosion hitting everyone around it. Your raid should be spread out on the 3 platforms anyway, so this is not very lethal in this fight. We honestly didn't even notice this mechanic was happening when we killed this boss. Be careful though, as if all your melee are grouped up in one spot and they do not move when the spirits explode, this can end up being a large amount of AoE damage hitting them all at once. This boss is very easy. Use arcane protection pots to mitigate AoE raid damage and make your healers' lives easier. Don't forget to loot your Qiraji Lord's insignia and move on into the temple. After you down Skeram, run over to the right side of the temple entrance and talk to this NPC. She will give you a quest to talk to her again, and then you get a gray bug mount that you are able to ride inside the temple. Normal mounts will not work inside the temple, so make sure everybody grabs one of these on their first time in. Qiraji Brainwashers will randomly mind control and fear targets. Focus them first, CC the mind control, don't kill your friends. The Guardians will do an occasional frontal AoE knockback, which is not really a big deal in this room. The next pack is a patrol, which we opted to skip at this time because, as you can see, they padded away from us right as we got down to their tunnel. At the bottom of the ramp is another Brainwasher and Guardian pack. You will be tempted to stack under the ledge to avoid the Guardian knockback and avoid pulling the patrol above like we are here. But remember, the hardcore mechanic is active at all times when the raid is in combat. The Spirit Explosion damage can be very lethal if you are stacked in one spot. This is where we had our first couple deaths. The warriors spawn groups of small adds when they die, use frost traps and AoE them down. The most dangerous part of this trash is the spirit AoE damage if you forget to spread out. You can use arcane protection potions to mitigate mistakes here. The Bug Trio room has 2 packs in it. Use a hunter to pull back into this room. Do not bunch up in the hallway and allow room to avoid the spirit explosions. The only dangerous part of this trash is grouping up in the hallway and letting your spirit explosions stack up and deal large amounts of AoE damage. Make sure you click the obelisk before starting the boss to engage the next phase of the hard mode mechanic. It is on the right side of the entrance as you come into the room. We opted to kill Kree, Vem, then Yauj as our kill order. The hardest version of the fight is leaving Kree for last, as killing Vem enrages the remaining bosses, causing them to hit very hard, and Kree hits the hardest. Tank Yauj and Kree separately, with a third tank picking up Vem and chasing him around as he will randomly charge the raid and reset aggro. Yauj casts a heal, so if the player tanking her cannot reliably kick, assign a melee to kick that heal. Kree will cast Poison Volley, which can be dispelled. The hard mode mechanic in this fight changes, so now your spirits will slowly walk toward you after they spawn. They only explode if they touch the player who they are following, but if you're able to avoid them for about 10 seconds, they will disappear without exploding. Once again, this is the most lethal part of the fight, as your melee need to move away from their spirits quickly once they spawn, or the overlapping damage can become lethal. Arcane protection potions are very useful here. Once Kree dies, immediately move away from his corpse as he leaves a poison cloud that ticks 4 big damage. The other 2 bosses will charge to his corpse, heal to full, then resume attacking. Yauj casts an AoE Fear with a 20-second cooldown throughout the fight, so Tremor Totem / Paladin Fear Break is useful for this fight. Once Vem dies, Yauj will full heal and enrage and begin hitting the remaining tank very hard. Rotate tank cooldowns and external cooldowns like Barrier and Bark Skin to make healing manageable and finish off the boss. The guardian packs in this hallway are fairly simple, but once again, the only real danger is your spirit explosions, so do not all group up in the corner like the old strat for these. Use both sides of the hallway to have your back to a wall and avoid knockups, killing anybody from fall damage, and move away from your spirits to avoid the explosions. There's one more patrol of warriors. Just kill them and AoE down the small adds using frost traps to help control them. Next up is Battleguard Sartura. Make sure to click the obelisk on the right side before engaging the boss to activate the next hard mode mechanic. Sartura and her adds can all be stunned when they are not spinning, so take advantage of this. Try to only use long duration stuns, so warriors avoid charging or intercepting, as they will cause DR and shorten your good stuns. While they cannot be stunned while spinning, they can be taunted to hold them in place to prevent them from moving into the raid and causing AoE damage. The adds will do a knockback and drop threat, but they also don't hit very hard, so don't worry too much. We DPS them down first and then burn Sartura, however this boss seems so easy that it's probably possible to just tank the adds off to the side and focus the boss. Sartura enrages at low health, which makes her whirlwind much more dangerous. Melee should consider using limited invulnerability potions when she spins during the enrage, that way they can save themselves from damage and stay in and finish her off. You no longer have to avoid spirit explosions during this fight, as the hard mode mechanic has changed so that it's just a curse that goes out every 30 seconds that causes 6,000 damage over 10 seconds. It can be dispelled, but typically you'll just have your healers AoE heal through it and have your DPS focus on damage. Only have your mages and druids decurse if someone is at low health and in danger of dying to the curse, or if you have no target to DPS for some reason and then nothing better to do. This is the final version of this hardcore mechanic, and it will be active whenever you are in combat for the rest of this raid. The next obelisk for Fankriss is in the Sartura room before you start the gauntlet. Activating this obelisk turns on the next hard mode mechanic. In addition to the curse going out every 30 seconds, each player will also drop a pool on the ground that does nature damage. Do not stand in these and don't bunch up too tightly so that they're easier to avoid. The gauntlet constantly respawns, so you want to keep moving forward. Focus down each blue soldier bug as you come to them and let your tanks pick up the smaller bugs and drag them with you. Once you're at the end, do not stack up in the corner and try and drop combat like you used to in Era, because you'll all drop pools in one spot and probably die. Just stabilize at the end, clear the ads, and then get ready to move into Fankriss. Fankriss ends up being the first challenging fight of the raid in my opinion. The worm ads that spawn need to be focused down ASAP, as they will enrage after a short time and begin one-shotting your tanks. And they end up spawning on a pretty short timer, 2 at a time. In addition, Fankriss will debuff the tank with a healing reduction, so you will need to tank swap. Use 3 tanks, and whichever 2 tanks are not currently tanking the boss should be grabbing the worms as well as the smaller ads. DPS must prioritize the worms, or you will be overrun and they will enrage and they will wipe you. Tank all the ads near Fankriss so you can cleave off the worms and keep damage on the boss. You will occasionally teleport a player to one corner of the room and web them. DPS will need to break them out. This can target your tanks, so be aware of that and be ready to break them out quickly. However, when it does target a tank, it seems that Fankriss will just follow them over to the wall. Keep in mind you will need to be dealing with the extra raid damage from the curse and moving out of the puddles every 30 seconds, so expect to move around the room. If the worms start to overrun you like they did here for us, they will just one-shot all of your tanks and you will wipe. Respect the worms. Focus them down above all else. Next up is Viscidus. He has no trash, so just move on up. Make sure to activate the obelisk on the right side once you enter his room before engaging him to activate the next hard mode mechanic. Nature resistance and poison cleansing consumes are a must for this fight. This fight works a little bit different than it did on Era. As you can see, he does have a damage reduction like he used to, but it's not nearly as severe, so you can see that his health is actually just going down from our DPS. You do still want to focus on dealing frost damage to freeze and shatter him, so have your melee DPS use frost proc weapons with frost oil, and your range using frost wands or frost bells as much as possible. Once he freezes, swap to your regular weapons and hit him with enough melee attacks to shatter it. Save all of your cooldowns for the split, and kill the small slimes as much as possible before they reform. Remember that he does reset threat after this, so don't be like me and forget this and pull aggro. On this fight for the hard mode mechanic, instead of leaving pools on the ground, everyone will glow green and then a few seconds later explode for AoE nature damage to everyone around them. Your melee must spread out when this goes off or they will kill each other. This is why I'm not standing in melee range with my Cold Rage dagger and hitting him with Frost Oil here, because I would just be crowding the melee and make it harder for them to spread out for the AoE. Because the damage reduction isn't as strong in the SOD version, it's honestly just more useful for me to just do my regular DPS rotation and throw out poison cleanses from range. As you can see, we only ended up having to kill the split adds once, and we ended up just burning him down with our damage in the process of freezing him and shattering him again. Huhu trash is pretty easy here. Again, you'll find that the most lethal part of this trash is dealing with the hard mode nature explosion damage in the limited space of this hallway. Nature protection potions are essential here, especially if you're melee, as you are at most risk of getting blown up by everyone around you when crowding on the adds. The scorpions cleave. Don't stand in front of them if you're squishy. They die very fast. For these packs, the brown wasp put out a poison on random targets called Itch. It cannot be cleansed, and if the white stingers charge you while you have Itch, you will get one shot. Reaction potions will prevent this, so keep them handy. Kill the lashers first to reduce AoE damage to your raid, then kill stingers since their charge can be lethal, and then wasps last. Remember, the most dangerous part of this trash is getting caught bunched up in this hallway and having the nature damage explosions hit everybody while they're also taking 6k curse damage. Stay spread out. Next up is Huhuran. Be sure to activate the obelisk on the left side of the entrance to Huhuran before engaging. The hard mode no longer causes a nature damage explosion, everyone just now has 10% less max HP. And the curse will continue to go out every 30 seconds, dealing 6k damage over 10 seconds. This 10% health debuff will be active for the rest of the raid along with the curse. Pre-pot nature protection potions, and make sure you have your potion cooldown available before you start the fight, so when she enrages at 30%, you can pop a second one. Melee should probably wear some good NR pieces, but do not sacrifice DPS by wearing bad NR greens. You want to burn her down quickly. As a ranged, I didn't wear any extra NR except what was on my tier 2, and I was totally fine. She is tauntable and sod, so you will use a tank swap to avoid the poison debuff from stacking too high on your main tank. Hunters will want a trank shot to remove frenzy to reduce damage on the tank. Range want to stay spread out as she shoots random poison bolts that will silence any players near the target they hit. Do not cleanse Wyvern Sting as it deals massive damage to the target when dispelled. Save your potion cooldown for when she gets to below 30%, as well as any survival cooldowns, as the boss will start spamming AoE poison bolts that hit the closest targets. Priest Barrier is very useful here. Do not wipe on this boss at all costs. Once she enrages at 30%, she will stay enraged for future attempts, making it nearly impossible to kill her because she'll be spamming poison bolts the entire fight. If your raid is mostly Phase 5 Bis with world buffs and consumes, this boss should be very easy. Alright, next up, the Anubis-Hath Defenders. Unfortunately, these are kind of a joke now. Their hands will glow different colors depending on what abilities they have. Watch out for the flaming hand, indicating that they have Meteor. Stay stacked up for these as they deal massive damage split among the number of players stacked in the area they land. If you don't stack in your tank and he gets hit by a meteor, he will get one shot. Green glowing hand indicates plague, and the plague target just needs to run out so they don't do AoE damage to the raid. They all spawn ads, but the ads can basically be ignored. They just get cleaved down instantly. And each one has a reflect of some kind, either Arcane Fire or Frost Shadow. At low health, they will either enrage or explode. However, if they do start to explode, you can just DPS them down and kill them. You don't need to run out like you used to. Twin Emperors. Click the obelisk right in front of you as you enter the room to activate the new hardmode mechanic, which will cause 3 small eye tentacles that cast Mind Flay to spawn every 30 seconds during the fight at the same time that the curses are going out. You must keep the bosses on opposite sides of the room, as if they get too close together they will start healing each other. Both bosses can be damaged by physical and spells, however Vecnalash, the melee boss, takes 2 times damage from physical attacks, and Veclor, the caster mob, takes 2 times damage from spells. You still cannot tank Veclor in melee range, even though you can do melee damage to him. He will cast an arcane explosion that knocks back any targets in melee range. So your melee DPS should be crossing the room whenever they switch to stay on Vecnalash, and your casters will be moving across the room to DPS Veclor. We used a 4 tank strat with 1 melee tank and 1 spell tank on either side. Because one of our spell tanks was a paladin spamming exorcism, we expected threat issues on that side, so we decided to have our casters stay on the other side and only DPS the spell mob when he was on our warlock tank. Since Vecnalash can be damaged by spells now, this works out just fine. It only slows the fight down a little. Bugs all over the room will randomly get big and either enrage or explode for AoE damage. Fire protection potions can be useful here. Melee can help DPS down the bugs and the eye tentacles when they are running across the room for the switch. This fight is honestly a bit of a joke now. They stun themselves in place for several seconds every time they switch, and their health pool is pretty low for the damage we're doing with world buffs. They share health and will die at the same time. The trash after Twin Emps used to be a bit of an ordeal, but now it's super easy. Focus down the Slayers first, since they have low HP and will cleave your melee pretty hard. Mind Flayers and Champions can be killed kind of in any order. Champions have an intimidating shout that fears in melee range, and a knockback that drops threat. Just be ready to taunt to pick them back up once they drop threat. Mind Flayers will mind control random targets, single target fear a random target, and they die, they do an AoE Horrify and Mana Burn that cannot be dispelled or broken with Shaman or Paladin Tremor. However, this effect can be outranged or LOS'd. Vecnus hatchlings are a new mob in this hallway that we hadn't seen before. They don't appear to do anything special that we can tell. You just kind of AoE it all down. You should be able to blow through the trash in this hallway pretty easily. This Karaji Warlord does an AoE knockdown that hits for about 1800 physical damage. Tank and spank him, AoE heal, you'll be fine. Obsidian Nullifiers drain mana, and they will explode for big AoE damage if they reach full mana, just like at the start of the raid. They die very fast and should never reach full mana as long as you prioritize DPS on them first. The Warders used to have 2 abilities, but either they only have 1 now, or they die so fast that we only ever see one of their abilities. They can AoE Root, AoE Fear, AoE Silence, Fire Nova, or Dust Cloud that reduces chance to hit. This trash is all very easy now. Ouro's obelisk is tucked behind this corner on the right side. Once you walk into the room, make sure you click it before you start the fight to activate the next hard mode mechanic. Ouro will sit in one spot once he pops up and cannot be taunted. Every so often he does a sandblast attack, which causes everyone in a cone in front of him to spin for a few seconds and massively reduces their threat. You'll want to divide the area around him into 3 sections. The main tank will obviously be in the direction he is facing. Your backup tanks will be behind the boss on his left side, and you'll want 2 to 3 off tanks here to be safe. But as you'll see, we were pretty sloppy here with the threat, and it still died super easy, so you might only end up needing 1 or 2 off tanks. The rest of your raid should be behind the boss on his right side, in the remaining 3rd wedge of the circle around the boss. When executed properly, the main tank will get sandblasted, and the boss will switch to whichever off tank is second threat. This tank will then move into the position where the main tank was standing, and tank there until they eventually get sandblasted, and so on. Do not pull threat on accident like we did and cause your off tanks to all get sandblasted, or they will fall below the DPS and threat, and then when the main tank gets sandblasted, the DPS will be highest threat and they will start to get hit by the boss. The hard mode mechanic in this fight, in addition to the curse and the 10% health reduction, is a giant Cthulhu eye that floats up out of the ground and then pulses and disappears. Turn your character away from the eye when it pulses, or it will disorient you for a few seconds. Sweep will randomly knock back players away from the boss, just run back in. Around 2 minutes into the fight, earthquakes will appear as rocks popping out of the ground and do AoE damage. Move out of these. If you do not kill the boss before 3 minutes, he will submerge and summon adds that you'll need to pick up and kill. He'll re-emerge somewhere in the room and you resume the fight. If you have mostly phase 5 bis and world buffs, you will kill him before he submerges very easily. One last nullifier warden pack before the last boss. Honestly, these were never very hard, but on Sod they are a complete joke. This gilded scarab we thought was maybe like a loot goblin, and we killed it, but it didn't drop anything. It did summon a little dirt mound that we were not able to interact with. We're thinking maybe if you leave it alive longer, it might do something that might result in some sort of bonus loot or reward. We're not really sure. I wasn't able to find any info on this online so far, but probably by next week somebody will have it figured out. The Cthulhu hard mode obelisk is on the left side before you get to his doorway. Go ahead and click that to activate the final form of the hard mode mechanic. This new mechanic is a debuff that causes you to take 10% more damage, but also deal 10% more damage and heal for 10% more. This is in addition to the 10% health reduction and the raid-wide curse that goes out every 30 seconds. This is the only truly challenging fight in the raid as far as we experienced. Be ready for a bit of a learning curve, as your raid will need to learn to avoid the many lethal sources of damage in this fight while killing tentacles ASAP. If you have a few deaths early in this fight, you'll probably get overwhelmed by tentacles and they will end up doing too much damage for the raid to survive and you will wipe. The boss itself does not need to be tanked. The only targets that require a tank in this fight are the giant claw tentacles during phase 2. We ran 2 tanks, one for the north side and one for the south side. Phase 1 is Cthulhu's eye. He will repeatedly cast a green eye beam on random targets on his threat table. This attack chains an infinite number of times to any target within 10 yards and increases in damage every time it jumps. You can survive it chaining once, but usually a second jump will be lethal to that third player, especially because everyone has less health and takes more damage with the hard mode debuffs active. Assign your melee into groups of 2 if necessary, and have them spread around the eye with at least 10 yards between each group. Melee should always move with their partner and give other melee groups plenty of space for the entire fight, as eye beams will be cast during phase 2 as well. Avoid bunching up with multiple groups tightly stacked around a single target, or they will all die to an eye beam. Small eye tentacles will pop up around the boss every 45 seconds and will need to be killed ASAP. These are top priority for all DPS for the entire fight, both phase 1 and 2. Keep in mind they do AoE damage to anyone standing under them when they pop up out of the ground, and they always spawn in the same place, so avoid this damage as it can be lethal when combined with other damage going out randomly throughout the fight. 45 seconds after the pull, he will cast Dark Glare. He turns red and faces a random direction. After a few seconds of charging up, he then shoots a giant beam in that direction and slowly starts turning either clockwise or counterclockwise. This beam is an instant kill and must be avoided. Do not die to Dark Glare. If he turns towards you, just pick a direction and get out of the way. Eye beams do not go out during this time, so as you are rotating around the boss to avoid Dark Glare, you do not need to worry about staying spread out. Just keep hitting the eye tentacles and then the boss as you move. Once he has turned about 300 degrees, Dark Glare ends and he resumes casting eye beam on random targets. Players should return to their positions ASAP to prevent lethal eye beams. Once the eye is killed, Cthulhu's body will appear. You will begin spawning more tentacles around the room, and the small eye tentacles will spawn more frequently. Giant eye tentacles will cast the same eye beam like the big eye did, so you must maintain your spread and never have more than 2 players within 10 yards of each other throughout the entire fight. These cannot be interrupted or stunned, you just need to DPS them down ASAP. Giant claw tentacles need to be tanked as they hit pretty hard. DPS them down without stacking too many melee on each one. If possible, try to move out of the way as these tentacles spawn, as they will knock you back and do notable physical damage. This damage can be very lethal, especially if you happen to already have low health from being eye-beamed. You do very little damage to the body when it's not in its weakened phase, so do not worry about DPSing it. Tentacles are always highest priority. Remember, small eye tentacles first, then giant eye tentacles, then giant claw tentacles, then the boss. Random players will get eaten by mouths that pop up and sent down into the stomach. There are 2 tentacles in the stomach. Once they both die, the boss will enter a weakened state and take full damage for 45 seconds. These stomach tentacles have very low health. I crit a Starfire on one of them and did like half of its HP, so they're very easy to kill. Don't stay in the stomach too long, however, as they do increasing damage to you while you are down there. Move to the platform in between the 2 tentacles and stand on the geyser to be sent back up to the surface. If you are a tank or healer, just instantly go stand on this geyser and get out of there. Only DPS should be worrying about killing the tentacles. Kill 1 tentacle ASAP and then check with the raid back on the surface before killing the second and pushing the boss into his vulnerability phase. In SOD, the tentacles do not stop spawning during this burn phase, so don't make the mistake of delaying the burn phase too long. You will not really find a completely perfect time to push it, and you're going to need several burn phases to kill the boss anyway. I would say don't delay pushing into the burn phase by more than like 5 to 10 seconds to give DPS on the top a chance to finish off any tentacles that are currently up, and then they can get on the boss. Even once the boss turns purple and enters the burn phase, you should still be prioritizing any tentacles near your part of the room. Once everything near you is dead, burn the boss as hard as you can. Save big AoE cooldowns like Starfall to get the eye tentacles down as quickly as possible during the burn phase to maximize the time you can be on the boss. You must prioritize killing tentacles ASAP to minimize raid damage and keep everyone alive. However, you cannot all converge on every tentacle and group up, or you'll wipe to an eye beam chaining to all your DPS. Trust your raid team to handle tentacles in their assigned part of the room, and only move to help with tentacles when it's safe and there is room to stay spread out and do so. Because I ended up with a decent amount of downtime here when there were no tentacles in my area of the room to kill and the boss was not in burn phase, I focused on decursing during that time to reduce the outgoing damage to myself and people around me. Because the eye beam can chain through the entire raid and instantly wipe you, there is a trick to entering the room at the start of the fight. The first person through the door will instantly aggro the boss and be the target of his eye beams. As long as nobody else takes any actions as they run into the room behind them, the boss will only cast eye beams on that first target. Choose one of your tanks to be the first person in, and have your priest shield them, and have them ready to use personal cooldowns to reduce damage and buy the rest of your raid time to get into position. For Alliance especially, you must have this priest drink to full mana before the tank enters the room, as if a tick of Blessing of Wisdom goes off, it will put the paladin who cast that Blessing of Wisdom on the aggro table, the boss will cast eye beam on them, and it'll chain to your entire raid and wipe you. It seems a little silly, but you must respect this rule when entering the room, as a stray eye beam will wipe you. Your tank should be able to take about 3 to 4 eye beams as they run into the room before anybody else does anything or casts any spells. Once the raid is all the way into the room and is able to start spreading out into their assigned positions, shield and heal the tank and begin DPSing the boss as you get into position. Pre-pop Greater Nature and Shadow Protection for this fight, and be ready to use Nature Protection Potions on cooldown throughout the fight to keep eye beam damage manageable. Once you get the hang of killing tentacles ASAP, avoiding lethal damage, and maximizing damage to the boss during the burn phase, you will be rewarded with a dead old god. This is my first time making a guide for anything related to WoW, so if it's useful to people and you like it, I'll try to make more. Currently, I stream Hardcore WoW and Season of Discovery a couple days a week.